All right, continuing where we left off. So I ended up making a bunch of changes to support the integration testing. I changed not null to not empty. Realized that we don't really want empty strings in our IDs or tasks. And the same with the to-do list. I changed not null to not empty there as well. So I made those changes. I went ahead and created a base resource class that all of our other resources can extend, and I moved the validation into it. I've got our validator object created here, and then I added a parameterized validate method that can take in either to-do items or to-do lists and run the validation on them, and then generate a bad request exception if there are problems. Now, I did change this slightly. I added sorted in here so that way the violation error messages are consistent, meaning if there's multiple error messages, they don't get flipped around kind of non-deterministically. Now it's deterministic in how the messages will look. So that's one update. I then went through all of the resources and updated them to extend base resource. So you can see the two changes that relate to that in these files. I made a couple updates in the post and put endpoints. So, I was only string escaping the name value and the task value for to-do items. I went ahead and also added string escaping or HTML escaping into the IDs as well, just to make sure there isn't any HTML in any of the places where it could be. So that was one change that I ended up making. Other than that, everything is pretty much the same here. I forget what this change is. I did make this abstract as well. And I changed the hard-coded 200s and put response.status.ok.status code, so I ended up making a few updates for that. And then I added the additional tests to verify null values behave correctly, and we get a correct error message, and empty values behave correctly. And this is what I was saying about multiple constraint violations will be sorted. It used to be sometimes to-do item task cannot be empty would be at the front, and sometimes to-do item ID cannot be empty is at the front. So by sorting them, it's now consistent. ID will always come before task in this output. All the HTML stuff works, and we get the appropriate bad requests when objects are pushed in via post or put endpoints, and that's for all four of them. All right, so all that's looking good. I should add, there was one other change I made to these tests. In order to test long strings here, I'm using strings.pat, and strings is from Guava, which is a Google library. And I'm using it to basically stretch this string out to over 200 characters by just padding it on the end with the letter A. So in order to do that, I ended up adding a Guava dependency. So it looks like all the dependencies are up here. Let's see. Yeah, so there's Guava. We added validation and comments text for the HTML parsing in Jakarta L. And I did end up having to do some dependency convergence fixing. So there was, this OSGI dependency needed fixing, as well as here, and also JBoss logging. So updated kind of all the problems for that, and the rest of these were already added, except Guava. So now everything's good. Get status. So we ended up making a lot of changes kind of throughout, which makes sense. So added validation. All right, so now we're all committed. The next thing that we'll look at is OpenAPI. So in order to document our APIs or our API, we need to be able to automatically generate OpenAPI documentation, which is basically a JSON or a YAML file that describes all the input and output and endpoints of our API, potential responses, what the responses look like, examples, all that detail. So within the Java world, most of that happens with a library called Swagger. So if I search for, like swagger.io is the site. OpenAPI, open source tools, like somewhere in here there's documentation. So I'm really looking for Swagger integration and configuration. Okay, here we go. So this is the GitHub page that has pretty much all the documentation. So we're going to want some of these dependencies. We're actually using JAX-RS 3, but I believe the JAX-RS 2 Swagger library is compatible with JAX-RS 3 also. So let's look and see if this is the latest. Uh, 2.1.11 is the latest. That's a little bit newer than this one. So let's go ahead and get this. And we'll add it to our top level POM here. It was io.swagger. And let's come back to our documentation. So there's also a servlet initializer. I don't think we need this. Well, let's see, what is this? So how is that different than? Okay, I guess these are the newer ones down here. I don't think we need servlet initializer, but we'll come back and get it if we realize that we do. We do want Swagger annotations as well. Let's look for that. Let's actually look for a bomb to see if, okay, I don't see a bomb, but I do see Swagger annotations here, which is also 2.1.11. So let's get that. All right, let's see what else. Models and core. I'm not sure if we're going to need these or not, but if we realize that we do, then we'll come back for them. All right, so in order to expose OpenAPI, there are these two JAX-RS resources. All right, so we've got our own resources here. We also want to include these resources. So let's go ahead and bring these dependencies into our REST module. Somewhere up here, like right here. Oops. Okay, let's Maven update this. All right, so let's just copy these two classes, come up here to our application. So we're telling it to bring in the package that contains our classes. Oops. So let's also bring in these. All right, there we go. Let's see what else. So these will expose OpenAPI.json and YAML, as well as one without an extension that uses an accept header. So we'll support both of those options. We're not using an application, we're using a resource config. Yeah, so we're effectively doing this. We could create one, an actual object and then register the object, or you can create or register just the class. If we wanted to configure it by passing in a custom configuration path, then we could do it this way. But the way we did it should be fine. So they're talking about various servlets and things. We don't really care about that. We're not using servlets directly. We could do it this way by extending this resource, which we don't need to do that either, because this way it should be fine. Now, we probably want a configuration file that provides a lot of this setup information. So we could do YAML, like this example, or JSON. Let's just copy this. We'll start with this example and then potentially change it. So there's also additional configuration properties. I'm not sure how far down those are. So servlet init stuff, programmatic configuration, servlet, initializer, OpenAPI definition. So we could update the configuration to do custom readers and things. We might end up doing that. What else is down here? Resource scanning. So we don't actually need to, well, I guess we do need to scan resources, but when we paste in that YAML. Okay, here's an example of JSON version of the configuration, and here's all the configuration properties. So I'll pause there. Over here, let's go ahead and create a new file. And paste that in. So I chose that file name because let me see, dependencies, annotations, configuration. No, that's all the way down there. Okay, here we go. So yeah, OpenAPI by default looks for specific files, and here's kind of the list. I don't like just calling it OpenAPI because that almost makes it seem like it's the output and not the configuration. So I'm basically going to do one of these, and since we have YAML that we copied, I'm doing this one right here. So now let's jump down to the configuration properties. Yeah, so we could add some of these. We've got resource packages. No need to do explicit classes. We'll let the package figure it out. So we don't want this package. We want com.tutorialapi.rest, and we'll get everything from inside there. Actually, up here. Pretty print is okay. 0 basically turns off caching, if I remember. So there's pretty parent. We don't need to ignore any routes. Yeah, so 0 disables the cache. -1 means cache forever. Well, otherwise, we could specify milliseconds for how long to cache this information. I guess we'll leave it at set to 0. We don't necessarily need any specific filters. We don't need a custom reader yet. We might end up implementing a custom reader or scanner. We do want to read all resources by default. Object mapper processor, we don't need that. Sort output, that's probably would be useful. I don't know what the default is. I guess we'll go ahead and stick it in here and see what happens. Always resolve app path. So we don't currently have an application path, but potentially we should add it. Let's remember this because we don't have an application path on our application, but I suspect that means OpenAPI isn't going to know that our REST endpoints actually fall under the /API. context path. So potentially we should add /API for our application path so that we get that in our output, but we'll check and make sure once we generate it. So we've also, now we have this OpenAPI block with info. So the version will be project.version. And we'll need to make sure that when we build with Maven that it does templating to put our project version in here. Title, we can call this, what, tutorial API, what, example, I guess. Description is this big string here. I guess we don't need kind of all this stuff. We might come back to this at some point. Sometimes there are single quotes here and sometimes there aren't. I guess I'll go ahead and add some in. We don't have a terms of service, so I'll delete that line. We might come back and add it in later. Email, we don't really have yet, so I'll just make this support at tutorialapi.com. And I'm fine with an Apache 2 license. We haven't added a license yet, but we'll come back to licensing at some point. All right, so this is a very basic OpenAPI configuration. We've added our OpenAPI resources here. So let's go ahead and start the server. Do we have it in here? No. And see what happens. Oops, I don't know what I clicked on. No, I clicked debug. That's fine. Cannot find annotation method value. Okay, so there are some warnings here. So we do have a few produces. Let me go back. Let me just run it. Maybe it won't give us those warnings. I'm not sure. We do have some produces in here. I don't know that we have produces that don't have values, but it's complaining about all of these thing warnings. Maybe we can get better warnings. Potentially these are coming from these resources and not my resources. So that one has produces. Produces. So I don't see any problem with theirs. Okay. So we're getting some dependency convergence problems. But yeah, I'm not sure where these errors here are coming from. So let's go ahead and fix these convergence problems, and we can come back to the OpenAPI stuff after this. So we've got basically Swagger JAX-RS2 has a lot of things that we want to ignore, is basically the summary, or exclude, I should say. So let's exclude this. Here's our REST. Where's our, okay, here's our Swagger JAX-RS2. Where's that coming from? So the newer version is coming from JAXB runtime. All right, for logback core, our version is newer than what's coming in from JAX-RS2, so let's exclude this as well. Commons lang, the version from Commons text is newer, so let's exclude this from JAX-RS2. snake YAML. So, okay, in this case, the one from JaxRS2 is newer than the one that we're getting from the Jersey test framework core. So we'll add an exclusion down here, org.snake.yaml. Or org.yaml. All right, and then the last one is Jakarta Servlet API. So everything is at version 5 except for Swagger JaxRS2. Is that what I typed in here? Yeah, JaxRS2. So let's come back up here and add another exclusion. That's for Jakarta Servlet. All right, let's rebuild. Okay, so now we're getting the same compilation warnings here as we are in our IDE. Okay, so let's just quickly comment these out just to see if that fixes these compilation problems. I should have only done REST. I'm not 100% sure if this is causing the problem or not. My assumption is yes, because we were building just fine back before we added those resources. Yeah, so we're running the tests now for tutorial API REST. So these endpoints are definitely causing the problem. And now that I commented them out, it's unused. So I'm curious if it's only coming from one of them. So it was complaining about path. Like path has a value here. Okay, so one problem is that this endpoint is using JavaX, not Jakarta. So it is using the older version. Okay, potentially we brought in the wrong dependencies. I think there are Jakarta versions of these dependencies. Where'd the browser go? So let's come back over here. Let's look in the Swagger module. So if I scroll down through here, okay. So here we have JaxRS2 Jakarta. So we should probably be using this one, and for Swagger annotations, we should probably be using the Jakarta one as well. So do both of these, okay, they're both likely at 2.1.11, 2.1.11, okay. So let's come back over here. Let's go back into our POM. Let's stick a Jakarta on here and here. And up here, my assumption is that these dependencies are the same. Not sure how valid that assumption is, but we'll go with it as being true for now. Let's do a fresh clean. Okay, so if I update Maven here to get those new dependencies, let me add this back into it before this makes it down there. Oh, it already made it. All right, it's looking better. It looked like it made it past the compile phase. And if I open this up, I now see Jakarta in here. So that was likely the problem. We got a fresh build here. Now we're not currently using any annotations because I haven't annotated any of our methods. And what I mean by that, let's come back over here to the documentation. Well, I guess I'll keep scrolling down. I'm assuming there's some example annotations in here, like operation. I didn't see it. Oops. Let me search. Okay, there's this whole section on annotations. What's operation? Yeah, so we're basically going to end up with something like this. Let me copy that. And let's start with, we'll basically start from the top. So we'll start with delete to-do item resource. So basically we're going to have annotations like that. I don't really like the formatting here. All right, so we'll have a summary. There's really a bunch of things in here. So yeah, we'll do like an operation ID. I'm gonna put words in here for now so that we can get this up onto a user interface and see exactly where things go and what they look like. So description, so our media type is application JSON. I guess I'm not sure if I can actually, yeah, I should be able to include that. Our schema is actually a to-do item, not a user. And we'll end up with multiple API responses for error situations. This should have a response code. That's actually a string. Okay, let's start with this. And let's rebuild. Oops, not that. Hopefully I didn't actually delete something there. Because I wanted this dash RF. And I wasn't fast enough. All right, so I'll restore this. We're already at close to 30 minutes. I'll bring this back and from Git, and then use local history to bring our OpenAPI changes back in, and then we'll pick up from where we left off in the next one. Always exciting to accidentally delete most of your source code. Yeah. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Don't make fun of me too hard in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.